This is the, hope you had a good morning and a good lunch, and this is now the keynote session coming up this afternoon. It is PwC's pleasure, and we're very proud to introduce the author of The Lean Startup, someone I think everybody here knows and is very familiar with, Mr. Eric Ries.
Hello. I think I've now been in Canada for a whopping 12 hours or something. So I've learned a lot about the culture. No, I look forward to learning more in the few days I have with you. Thank you very much. This is a very large audience, so really appreciate you being here, and I appreciate our host, PwC, for bringing me out. I'd like to go over some pretty important ground rules for this talk. Those of you who see me speak before will already know the rules, so you're hopefully already doing it, right? Looking around. Okay, get with the program. All right, anyway, the ground rules are, first of all, I do not want your undivided attention. So phones in hands, please. Everyone take the phone. I'm waiting to see. Take it out of your pocket and hold it in your hand, if you would, because I don't want anyone to be disconnected from the internet on my account. That doesn't seem right. That's not really the kind of living I endorse. So please, if you made the mistake of turning your phone off, if you turn it back on. And all I ask is that you kind of tweet amongst yourselves while I'm talking. If you have questions, you can, of course, ask me, but more importantly, ask other people in the audience. Or if you use the Lean Startup hashtag, you can ask to the worldwide community of entrepreneurs who have embraced these ideas, and you can be part of a much bigger conversation than we can have just in this room. So is that everyone doing it? I'm looking to see if people actually, it's like a huge spotlight on me, which I'm just really not getting used to. So I can't actually see anything. So, okay, I'm trusting you that there are phones in hands. If you see someone next to you who's not tweeting, if you would help them out. And if anybody doesn't know how to tweet, if you haven't somehow missed the memo on Twitter, and now's your chance, just turn to the person next to you. They'll explain it to you. Okay, the other thing is that, and I just like your indulgence to try this out. You may, since this book came out, last September, my life has been a total whirlwind of speaking and travel, and by far, the best part of my job is I get to meet entrepreneurs from around the world and see what they're doing and talk to them about the real issues that are actually on their mind. And how many people here are in early stage startup? Just quick. Okay, all right, good. So that's what I thought. It's basically everybody. So my request is that we can actually spend some time having a conversation today and actually talk about real issues. And so I want to make sure everyone's on the same page, so I'll give an overview of the Lean Startup and share a few ideas from the book that I'm particularly excited about. But I'd like to leave some time with our host's indulgence to actually have a conversation, and that means have your questions ready. And I just want to point out one thing. This happens every time I talk to entrepreneurs. Generally, the first question will be a hypothetical question. It's like, hypothetically speaking, let's say I wanted to, so not me, a friend of mine is in a startup, and they are like ready to kill their co-founder. What should they do? I know. And we're used to asking questions like that because you never know. Your investor could be in the audience, and no one ever wants to admit that they actually have a real problem. But could we dispense with that today? Do you guys mind? And just we'll have the kind of whatever I say, you can kind of treat as on the record. But if you wouldn't mind treating what everybody else says as being in confidence, then we can actually get into some real issues. Is that people willing to go along with that? Can I at least get some nods of heads if that sounds good? Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. I get to hear the sound of my voice all the time, and I actually getting kind of tired of it. So I actually get to learn something if we can be in dialogue. So I really appreciate that. Here are some ideas from the book that I wanted to. I learned how to use this thing. All right, here we go. Some ideas from the book I wanted to share. 5 principles. First, that entrepreneurs are everywhere, that entrepreneurship is management, that the unit of progress of entrepreneurship is called validated learning, that we can steer a startup using the build, measure, learn feedback loop, and last, we can hold entrepreneurs accountable using something I call innovation accounting. And for those that are new to this material, I usually have to apologize at this point, because you came to this big conference and you wanted to hear about the latest, most exciting things that are coming out of the world of entrepreneurship, which I don't know if you guys have noticed, entrepreneurship is all of a sudden very cool, all over the world. I was just hearing it at lunch, even in Toronto, very cool thing to do. People are making movies about it, and you can read about it in the magazines, and you can watch it on TV. And those of you who are actually entrepreneurs know that entrepreneurship is not actually that cool. And so we have a bit of a mismatch because I'm going to talk to you about management and accounting, 2 of by far the most boring concepts ever invented by human beings. And so some people have a kind of cognitive dissonance at this point. They're like, wait, I wanted to hear about entrepreneurship. Why is this guy talking about management and accounting? That sounds really boring. And so my first thing I want to share, even before we can even get into the principles, is that if you think about the classic entrepreneurial movie, there's always a movie in 3 acts. Who saw The Social Network? Can I just get a quick show of hands? Oh, yeah, okay, everybody. Okay. Who's seen my favorite entrepreneurship movie of all time, Ghostbusters? Oh, so a lot of people. Okay, so if you think about The Social Network and or Ghostbusters, it's basically the same movie. You know, paranormal activity aside. Act 1, who are the founders of this enterprise and how did they come to be in the right place at the right time with the right technology, and what are their personality quirks and defects that will be very significant later, right? Remember Act 1? So you're in the university, you have this great idea, you know, you almost get thrown out of the university, or in the case of Ghostbusters, you do get thrown out of the university. In any event, you decide you're going to do a startup. And so Act 1 is about the protagonists, you know, how they get the office, what kind of space they work in, how hard they work, all that kind of stuff. If you remember in Ghostbusters, what do? They get the building, the car, the TV ad. Anyway, how we get the startup, you know, off the ground. Now, Act 2 in both movies is really very short. I call it the photo montage. It's like 2 minutes max, and it's just scenes of the entrepreneurs doing their work with no dialogue. So, you know, pounding on some keyboards, chugging a few beers, you zap a ghost. And anyway, we can get on to Act 3. Act 3, you always know Act 3 has begun because the entrepreneur's on the cover of a magazine. That's the official beginning. So we go basically from first customer to, you know, cover of magazines, and then we can get on to the really interesting stuff like Who Sues Who and Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and all that kind of stuff. So that's the movie. 99% of the movie is Acts 1 and 3. Who is the entrepreneur and how do they divide up the spoils? And so those of us who are actually in startups will know that's a kind of an odd, lopsided storytelling device, because the actual work, the actual decisions that take place that impact the success or failure of the company all happen during Act 2, during the photo montage. Why don't they make it into the movie? See where I'm going with this? It's because they're too boring. There's no dialogue in the photo montage, because think about what the dialogue would actually be. Who's been in a product prioritization meeting recently? Anybody? Okay, who feels like that would make a really good movie? Yeah. Is there anything more boring than arguing with your co-founders about what features should be in the first release and what features should not be? I mean, we spend so much of our time doing it. It's incredibly boring. And the problem we are having as entrepreneurs is not that we're not doing Act 1 well. We come up with great ideas all the time. And it's not that we don't have awesome ideas for what kind of car we're going to drive when we make a lot of money. The problems are all in Act 2, in the boring stuff, which we actually don't do that well. So if we're going to get better at entrepreneurship, we have to get better at the boring stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm sorry. It is going to be management and accounting from here on out. So let's start with entrepreneurs are everywhere. Maybe this is obvious because here I am in a city where I would have said I only knew 1 or 2 people, and yet so many of you are here. And everywhere I go, there is this worldwide entrepreneurship renaissance that I think is amazing to watch. But if we're going to get better at entrepreneurship, we have to do more than just, you know, call ourselves entrepreneurs. We have to understand what entrepreneurship is. And that thing I did a minute ago where I asked who's in a startup, and everybody raised their hand, I have done that exercise in I don't know how many dozens of countries, you know, many, many cities, many places where, you know, I had to be in simultaneous translation. No one even really understood what I was saying. That's one thing everyone does understand. Everyone knows when to raise their hand. Not one time has anyone interrupted me to be, excuse me, I have a question. How do I know if I'm in a startup or not? How do I know? We all know what we all saw the movie. And if you're, you know, 2 guys in a garage eating ramen noodles, working on some crazy thing, and people think you're nuts, then you're in a startup. But that's not a good enough definition, not the least of which is some crazy people in garages are just crazy people in garages. We have to do better than just like where you live and what kind of noodles you eat. I don't think that really should matter that much. So here's my definition of a startup. A human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And I've been using this slide since the very first time I got up on stage to talk about Lean Startup. And right before that first talk, I added this little footnote here, which has been getting successfully bigger in my slides over time. Because at first I was like, you know, by the way, there's this odd thing I noticed about this definition is that it doesn't actually say anything about what kind of company you're in, how big the company is, what industry you're in, even what sector of the economy. It just says you're trying to create disruptive innovation and you don't really know what you're doing yet. And therefore, entrepreneurship should work just as well inside companies of any size, sector, or industry. And I said that, I was on stage, so I had to speak confidently, but I had no idea if that was true. It was just seemed like a deductive consequence of the theory. And from that very first day, I have had the chance to meet a wide variety of entrepreneurs who don't work in a garage, who have perfectly good benefits and go to a nice office every day. Some of them didn't even try to become entrepreneurs, so what I call involuntary entrepreneurs. They took a safe job in a safe industry and then discovered that there's no such thing. And all of a sudden, now in our modern economy, we have more and more people facing this extreme uncertainty that we all take for granted. Now, for our colleagues in established companies, this is a source primarily of heartburn. For us, this is a source of opportunity. But regardless of how you look at it, entrepreneurship really is everywhere. It is now a really endemic part of our modern workforce. And so the kind of economy that we run now in the industrial world is an entrepreneurship economy. That's very exciting. But it also means that our skill at entrepreneurship matters a great deal. And if we're not doing very well, then we have a problem. So anyway, this is all a fancy way of saying that a startup is an experiment. But it's not a ye old 20th century style experiment in can it be built? Right? Because we live in a time where we can build anything that we can imagine. That's what's exciting about the advance of technology. But the problem with being able to build anything you can imagine is that you have to get really good at answering a second question, which is not can it be built, but should it be built? And we all know in most cases the answer is no. But why does it take us so long to find out? That's the theme of Lean Startup. But if you think about that from a kind of macro point of view, if you just permit me one dull relative for a moment, that means that the quality of our future economic prosperity is going to depend on the quality of our collective imagination and how well we're able to translate that imagination into reality. That is, of course, the challenge of entrepreneurship. And that's a really strange place to be in from a historical perspective. And it's a problem because the tools we have evolved to use to manage companies and supply chains and global industry don't actually work in the soil of extreme uncertainty that is where startups thrive. And I brought a demonstration. Oh yeah, we're wasting people's time. This is the demonstration. We're used to the idea that most startups fail, but I think we're very confused as to why. And so I brought this diagram. I don't know if this was making the rounds or if it was popular here in the year 2006 as it was in my hometown. In San Francisco, you could basically not walk down the street without someone talking to you about Web 2.0. Anyone remember Web 2.0? Back in antiquity of 2006 when that was still cool. If you can really have that feat of memory to remember, there was a time when people thought this wave of companies was going to transform everything. And so there was a lot of enthusiasm about this particular crop of new startups. And people were so enthusiastic about it that a graphic designer built this kind of patchwork quilt, this flag to be like the manifesto of Web 2.0, the revolution we were going to enhance. And this graphic was everywhere in 2006. All right, so just everyone's gone back in time to remember those heady days. Now I want you to remember 2009, particularly good year. In 2009, a different graphic designer was feeling a slightly different set of emotions about Web 2.0 when they put together this graphic. Here's our update. This is our 3-year report card on Web 2.0, and it's a very depressing chart. Because every single one of those red X's is a company that's already dead in just 3 years. And every single one of them seemed promising enough to have attracted investors, employees, founders, of course, to pour their time and energy into it. And it's already gone. And actually, even more depressing is, I don't know if there's enough contrast for you to see this, some of the companies are marked with green circles, which are meant to be the success stories of Web 2.0. And I thought that was a very cute thing in the graphic designer's definition of this chart. They said companies that have been acquired or went public, which is very funny because Web 2.0, it just means we're acquired by a larger company. No IPOs on this chart. And so the green circles are the companies where at least somebody made some money. Which, hey, I'm all for that. That's fine. But if you actually go through the list one by one, I mean, we all know that when a larger company acquires a startup, it always works out great every time. Oh, wait, no, I think I got it backwards. No, usually the product exits along with the founders and investors too, right? That's the last we ever hear of it. So most of these green circles are not successes at all. They're products that are no longer with us. They just somebody made some money along the way. Well, that's a little bit better than gambling, but not that much. And then there's some companies which are unmarked, which at the time of this chart that's 2009, at least they're still alive. But being alive, that's not a particularly great thing either. Because a lot of those companies are stuck in what we call the land of the living dead. They're not really successful, but neither are they bankrupt, so they won't die. They're like zombies. They just keep consuming resources. And I understand none of your companies are in this state, but you have friends. You know what I'm talking about. We're going to get to that, right? This happens where a company just won't quite fail, but it won't quite succeed either. Those are the worst wasters of people's time. So if you think about this chart, I chose Web 2.0 specifically because there's not one Web 2.0 company where you get pitched and you're like, boy, I wonder if that can be built. Right? It's like, I got a social network for dogs. Can it be built? Yeah, it can be built. But will the dogs eat the... sorry, never mind. Anyway, right, there's nothing in software that can't be built. The question is it worth building in the first step? And if you think about, if you extrapolate from this to the companies that you know, the friends that you have in startups, if you look at what we're doing as an industry, I think we are wasting people's time on an industrial scale. Because most of these companies were doomed from the start, and we didn't need to take 3 years and millions of dollars to find out what was wrong. And that's, of course, what we're trying to fix. Now, it has to be somebody's fault, naturally. And I should disclose at this point, and you're not supposed to do this as a professional expert who travels around being an expert, as I do. But most of the companies that I've built in my whole life have failed. In fact, most of the products I have ever worked on, the super majority, in fact, have failed. So, you know, if you follow me, you too can be a big failure. I know. It's not the best sales pitch, right? Yeah, I know. But that's the truth. The truth is anyone who's talking to you, telling you the truth about entrepreneurship is telling you about failure, or they're telling you something. And it has to be somebody's fault. It naturally can't be my fault. That wouldn't be appropriate at all. So it's ideal in these situations, just if you ever find yourself in this situation, it's ideal if you can blame these problems on someone who's dead, because then they can't argue with you. So I blame this guy. This is Frederick Winslow Taylor. Now, he's famous today for inventing something that he called scientific management, and we call management. And the problem is that today we remember Fred Taylor for most of his discredited ideas. Things like a time and motion study. If anyone took a class in the history of business, you will learn about time and motion studies. Scientists kind of following workers around with stopwatches to figure out exactly the best way to do every job. And we think of those ideas as really archaic. The problem is we are incapable of giving Taylor his due because his really important ideas, the ones that he truly invented that have had the biggest impact, are to us so obvious, we can't imagine they had to be invented in the first place. And so, you know, my favorite is the idea that work should be done as efficiently as possible. Okay, I want you to imagine the homework assignment. You are to write a polemic in favor of the idea that work should be done as efficiently as possible. And of course, you need to take into account your antagonists, their counter-arguments. What are the counter-arguments? Who out there doesn't believe? We are hyper aware of the importance of efficiency in our economy. It's all we ever talk about. We're obsessed with efficiency. So who's around that we have to, right? That's the problem. It's too obvious. The idea that you could study work scientifically and get better at it as an industry, that was a new idea. My personal favorite is what he called the task plus bonus system. We just call it tasks. See if you can wrap your mind around this idea. If you have a big project, the best way to get it done is not to just have one expert do it, but rather to decompose the large project into a series of smaller subcomponents called tasks. Farm those tasks out to functional specialists who are each in a functional department, so they do the same kind of task over and over again, and then they pass their work from one department to the next. And here's the best part. If one of the functional specialists finds a way to do their job or their task better than expected, if they're ahead of plan, they do better than expected, they should be paid a bonus instead of being penalized. Who's with me? Who's on the other side of that argument, you might ask yourself? Who thinks they should be penalized? Well, in the 19th century, the state of the art in management was that if someone found a way to do their task better than expected, what do we know about them? We know that they're a liar. Why? Because they could have been doing the task better this whole time, but they weren't. So they should be penalized. I'm not making this up. Not only should they be penalized, what about their coworkers who are all still doing it the old way? Right? Low character, the lot of them. They should all be punished. Everyone should be penalized in the whole shop. So I want you to think about that. Collective punishment for productivity improvement. To us, that is incomprehensibly stupid. And yet 100 years from now, when people look back on the way that we manage entrepreneurship, we're going to look just as stupid. Because we have not had a scientific revolution in entrepreneurship yet. And it's important for us, as we kind of engage in that project, to remember that someone had to ignite that revolution in management in the first place in order to give us the world that we now take for granted of global supply chains that are incredibly efficiently run, that have kept us all alive. Okay, every object you see, did anybody bring an heirloom antique with them? You know, from their great, no? Okay, no antiques in the room. That means that every object in this room, every piece of clothing, all the food we just ate was produced using the principles of scientific management as part of our global supply chain. So just a moment of silence. Thank you to our colleagues in general management who have kept us all alive. Okay, but there's a problem. And the problem is the slide I just showed you. The kind of management that Fred Taylor advocated and that even today powers our global supply chains is based fundamentally on planning and forecasting. Right? If you think about that, you want to penalize people who are behind plan and reward people who are ahead of plan. That means you need to have a plan. You need to be able to forecast what is going to happen in order to figure out who's ahead of plan. So everyone knows, if you're in a big company or in a surprising number of startups, if a manager is ahead of plan, they should be promoted, otherwise fired. That sound familiar to people? If you give that some thought, you will see that forecasting really only makes sense. It only works if you have a long and stable operating history from which to make the forecast. Right? Yes? And who feels like the world is getting more and more stable every day? Anybody? I'm still waiting for someone to raise their hand and ask the question. It doesn't make sense. As the instability increases, the accuracy of forecasting is going down, and the relevance of these kind of general management tools is decreasing. Certainly for those of us in early stage companies, which I guess is most of us today, these tools really don't make any sense at all. So what I have been traveling the world advocating for is a new kind of management. I call it entrepreneurial management, not as a replacement for general management, but simply as a peer discipline, something that we could study as scientifically as Fred Taylor did, and I hope ignite a comparably important revolution. And our goal is to build up a new toolkit of management techniques that are geared specifically to that context of extreme uncertainty that I was talking about a moment ago. And probably the most important tool in the toolkit is called the pivot. This has become kind of a bit of ridiculous jargon recently. I don't know if people have noticed. Is that happening even in Toronto? Yeah, you can't go anywhere. I mean, now it's gotten to the point, I was telling some people at lunch, I was reading the manuscript of a book that's about to come out, and there's a discussion, in the book there's, people talking about the need of somebody to pivot, and they can't even help being like, oh, I can't believe we're using the word pivot. That's the most overused piece of jargon ever. And then someone's like, no, I got even more overused. Like, you can't even use the word without it becoming like this meta conversation about jargon. I'm sorry about that. I saw that, by the way, I brought this cartoon. I don't know if you guys have seen this cartoon. This was, I swear to God, this was actually in the New Yorker magazine last year. It says, can you read this caption? I'm not leaving you, I'm pivoting to another man. I don't know. I honestly don't know what is happening to our culture that this is happening. Anyway, but I'm not that sorry, because you can't understand entrepreneurship at all if you don't have the concept of the pivot. Because if you study the real stories of how startups actually work, the successful ones were not really better ideas than the unsuccessful ones. If you go back to version 1 of, Face Mash before it was Facebook, or the first version of PayPal, which was this like digital cyber cash thing on PDAs that makes no sense at all. You look at all these famous companies, the thing they started with was not actually a particularly good idea. And they went through this very strange kind of zigzagging path from concept to the thing that made them successful. And unfortunately, there was a whole industry of journalists and publicists and marketing. There's a whole mythological industrial complex whose job is to make founders seem smarter than they actually were and kind of smooth out the rough edges in the story so that you can tell the story that everybody wants to read, the really interesting story about how the great man, it's always a man for some reason, great man was in the right place at the right time, had the idea fully formed, and just kind of made it happen. Everyone knows that story? But those of us who've been around successful startups know that it's not true. Now, I've been the beneficiary as a founder myself of the mythological industrial complex as much as anybody, and I'm not complaining. It's fine. I understand it's there to sell magazines and to help companies be more successful. But if we use those stories as guidance for what we should do as entrepreneurs, it gets us in real trouble. And that's because the real stories have these strange moments in them where the great entrepreneurs, when they run into difficulty, it's not that they just gave up and go home, oh, it's not working, I give up. But they didn't just persevere the plane straight into the ground through stubbornness. They did this strange thing we call the pivot. By analogy to basketball, keeping one foot anchored in what they had learned while changing one other thing about their business at a time. To be a little bit more technical about it, it is a change in strategy without a change in vision. So if you think about the vision as your destination where you want to organize the world's information, if you think about Google's mission statement. If you remember, the first business plan for Google called for them to make those search appliances, the yellow boxes they were going to install in companies. Anyone remember that? That was the genius plan. They were going to make a lot of money for Google. To us, seems like the dumbest idea ever. Luckily, they were able to make the pivot into AdWords and beyond. The vision of the founders didn't change. The strategy, the specific path to get around the detour did change. And that's the role of strategy in a startup. That is what the pivot is all about. And the premise of the lean startup is that the way to think about runway in a startup is not how much time do we have left, but rather how many opportunities to pivot do we have left. And the reason why lean startups are more capital efficient than regular startups is not because we eat ramen noodles and have crappy offices and save money. I remember during the financial crisis, when I was first talking about lean startup, it was really helpful to be known as the lean startup guy while the world was going to hell. And anyone remember RIP Good Times and this whole thing about all these startups were in panic mode, and people would call me up to, hey, how can I save money in my startup? And what they wanted me to say was get cheaper office chairs, and I know a guy who's got a liquidator business and that can help you save money. But actually, the way we build more capital efficient companies is to shrink the time between pivots, learn what we need to learn to get to the moment of pivoting a little bit sooner. And if you think about that, if you shrink that cycle time a little bit, you've effectively increased the runway of the company without raising more money. Does that make sense? If that doesn't make sense, nothing else I'm going to say is going to. So we should stop here if someone, okay. I can't see anything, so you just have to yell if it's not making any sense because I got the interrogation light on. Anyway, so that's what we're going to try to do. So how do we build companies to get to the moment of pivoting faster? First, we need a concept called validated learning. I'll tell you about the first company I worked at when I moved to Silicon Valley. We were a really, really hot company. We were building this virtual worlds product. It was very exciting. When was this? This is 2001, so right after the crash of the dot-com bubble. We had this huge vision, beautiful, beautiful business plan. I mean, if I had a copy of the business plan here and you read it, you would weep. It was so beautiful. It was that good. I mean, really amazing. And the business plan called for us to spend several years and several tens of millions of dollars building this incredible new technology. We would do it in stealth mode, very important, because we didn't want anyone to steal our precious idea, and also because we wanted to launch the product with a really exciting mega hype launch so that we would reach mainstream customers who would check out our product and all use it. So we were building, we were trying to make we used to talk about being the next AOL back when that was still cool. And so, that was our aspiration, to build a big mainstream product for company. And what's interesting is that we did something I call achieving failure. This company was not successful. We basically set $50 million on fire. So that's a sad, sad episode. But it was not because we didn't execute the business plan. We did everything we said we were going to do flawlessly. I mean, we had an amazing product. It's very, very successful launch. We were in all the major papers and on TV, and we were on CNN, and all kinds of mainstream customers heard about our product. We had an incredible team. I think we had staffed up to like 200 employees before launching the product, so you know where the $50 million went. The people who used to work at this company, if you add up the total valuation of all the startups that have been created by X members of this startup, I mean, it's staggering. So it was a very talented group. The only problem, tiny, itsy-bitsy little defect, is not that we didn't execute the plan, but it turned out that customers had not read the business plan. And so they didn't behave the way it said that they would, namely they didn't want the product. So we had this great business plan. It had this amazing hockey stick shaped graph. Anyone ever used a hockey stick shaped graph to raise money? Oh, I'm in Canada, so I don't have to explain what the hockey stick is. So I was just in Japan. They were like, the what? I was like, all right, sorry. Anyway, hockey stick shaped graph, most important graph in all of entrepreneurial finance. And our business plan said we would launch the product, and then I think it was like 6 or 9 months later, the hockey stick would turn up. And people forget that the most important aspect of the hockey stick shape is that long, flat part. So here we are, launched the product, we're riding along on the long, flat part. We're like, this plan is genius. It says we're going to have almost no customers, and lo and behold, we're right on plan. So we were on time, on budget, on plan. Of course, this is the question of achieving failure. If we are busy building something that nobody wants, why are we so proud that we did it on time and on budget? Why are we bragging about its exceptional quality if nobody wants it? And in particular, I understand that none of you are in this situation, but if you have a friend who's got the hockey stick, how do you know if you're going to be on the long part forever or if it eventually will turn up? That, I think, is the question that, if it's not on your mind, it should be on every entrepreneur's mind all the time. So I hope you see this as Taylorism, transplanted into the 21st century. Make a plan, make sure you're on schedule, and you just assume that whoever made the plan knows what's going to happen, knows that if we just do our jobs well, we'll get a good outcome. But unfortunately, that doesn't actually work. So I want to just tie this back to the word lean in Lean Startup. It comes from something called lean manufacturing, which was developed in Japan with Toyota Production System. These two men are widely credited with being its fathers. And I want to talk about a key concept in lean manufacturing, which is learning to tell the difference between which activities create value and which ones are waste. Because if you think about the stories we've been talking about so far, hilarious as they are, to be like, haha, you set $50 million on fire, that's hilarious. Like, the thing that really bothers me is not the loss of the money, but the waste of people's time. And this is not the first time that as a society we have confronted this problem. This was really the impetus to create the thing that we now call lean manufacturing. And Deming is the one who is famous for this phrase, that the customer is the most important part of the production line. And what he meant is that in manufacturing, all that matters is delivering a high-quality product to the customer. So whatever we do, we should view through the eyes of our customer to figure out, does it create value, and is it waste? If the customer cares, it's value, otherwise it's waste. And so it doesn't matter how much inventory we carry, it doesn't matter what our stockpiles look like. Customers don't care about the utilization rate of our machines, they only care about having a high-quality product. And when these ideas were translated into the software business, they were called agile software development, and it's the same system. It's focusing on cycle time, on building quality in from the beginning, of trying to drive waste out of our system. And so we owe a great debt to these gentlemen and to lean manufacturing, and I took inspiration from lean manufacturing when creating Lean Startup. But there's a problem that's the same problem we've been confronting over and over again as entrepreneurs, which is that if we're going to view everything we do through the eyes of the customer to figure out what matters, what do you do if you don't know who the customer is? Then whose eyes do you view what you're doing through? If you look at the most popular of the agile software development methodologies, take something like extreme programming, one of the practices is to sit a customer next to the engineers while they're building the product, so that at all times the engineers can turn to the customer and get an authoritative answer about how things should work. People familiar with that practice? Who do you sit with the engineers if you don't know who the customer is? Where do we get an authoritative answer if the level of uncertainty is too high? That's how we wind up wasting people's time. We assume we know answers that are in fact questions. That goes all the way back to thinking about a startup as an experiment. We have not answers, we don't have knowledge, we have hypotheses that cry out for testing. So after that startup I was just telling you about with the hockey stick failed, a couple of us refugees from that company built a second company called InView. And for those of you who've read the book, I talk quite a bit about InView in the book. I just want to tell one anecdote that I think really illustrates the idea of validated learning as an alternative to planning and forecasting for evaluating our progress. We had the idea to take this kind of virtual worlds concept and shrink it down into an instant messaging product. And we were still shooting to be the next AOL because that was still cool even in 2004. Oh, how times have changed. And we wanted to bring these 3D avatars to instant messaging, and we were doing our kind of MBA speak strategic analysis of the market. And what do you know about instant messaging? We know that it's a network effects business. Are people familiar with that? It means the value of the network is proportional to the square of the number of participants. And so if everybody already has an instant messaging network and all their friends are already on the network with them, you can't just bring a new instant messaging client to the market, because then people would have to switch and bring all their friends with them, and that's a high switching cost. And therefore, in my MBA speak, instant messaging is a market characterized by high barriers to entry. Does that all make sense so far? When I'm speaking to MBA classrooms, by the way, this is the only part of my talk I get nodding along to. The people are like, now, I don't know what these guys have been talking about, but that makes sense. And then I get the MBAs really excited and say, well, let me tell you our strategic brilliance for getting around this problem. We will build an instant messaging interoperable client that will take our 3D avatar technology and interoperate with all of the existing clients. And so when you want to have this avatar-based instant messaging, I personally wrote the software that would inject an extra button into the UI of all the famous IM clients, so that you would one click, boom, now your 2D instant messaging has become 3D instant messaging as one whole extra D, right? That's even better. And then here's the best part of the strategy. It's inherently viral. As soon as you push that button, we send a URL in your chat stream to the person you're chatting with, inviting them to join you in InView. So can you visualize that InView kind of spreading like a virus through all of the existing instant messaging networks? Yes? Okay, good. It's really important that you're able to visualize how good a strategy that sounds. Because, of course, you already know where this is going, because sounds good are the two most dangerous words in entrepreneurship. A lot of things sound good, but they just ain't so, and this is one of them. Every part of that strategic analysis is by the book correct, except for the empirical facts that it's based on, which are false. So it's actually wrong in every respect, except that it sounds good. That's how we get into trouble. So I want you to just kind of sympathize with me for a moment. I'll try to really see if I can get you to feel into what happened. We spent 6 months building this product, and I was the chief technology officer of this company, okay? So I personally wrote the software. Thousands and thousands of lines of amazingly beautiful, well-written software, if I do say so myself, to do the instant messaging interoperability, okay? That was my job. And we were really nervous because if you think about this product, 3D avatars, micropayments, user-generated content, it's a big product, and 6 months is not enough time to do a particularly good job, and so we had to cut quite a few corners. Everyone knows the saying, time, quality, money, pick two. Yeah, that's old engineering speak. Whenever you hear an engineer saying that, that's code for this product sucks, leave me alone. It's your fault. Okay, so we had to cut a lot of corners, and I will be totally honest with you, this product sucked, okay? This would be a product that would be more likely to crash your computer than it would be to give you a delightful 3D avatar experience, okay? I'm just being totally honest with you. So I was extremely nervous, and my co-founders and I were like, oh, I don't know if we can really release this product. I mean, everyone knows you release a bad product, it can ruin your reputation. We all had this image in our minds. Like enterprising journalist would, download it on day one, and they'd write this huge expose. I could just see the headline in the newspaper, right? Idiots at IMVU don't know how to build quality software. And a subtitle, never hire this guy again. There's a big arrow, and there's my mugshot right in the, in the newspaper. Like, that doesn't sound good at all. But we really didn't want to spend, yet again, years of our lives building something that nobody wanted. So we released it anyway, bugs and all. And then I kid you not, I was actually relieved when it turned out that nobody would even download it. Because, didn't crash anybody's computer. I was like, well, if you dodged a bullet. I was like, wait, hold on. I'm sorry, why did I just spend 6 months of my life building something that nobody wants? Again, that doesn't seem right. And in fact, as we unpacked the error that we made, we're like, why won't people download this product? Well, it turned out, through months of us kind of trying to figure it out, that our customers didn't want an instant messaging add-on. They didn't understand that. It was confusing, had zero desire for it. And we had to pivot the business into a standalone instant messaging network. And that whole strategic analysis about network effect, that's all just turned out to be just wrong. So there's no big deal to build a new instant messaging network. And after that pivot, InView has gone on to be really successful. So it was a very important moment in the company's life to be able to figure out that the strategy we had in mind simply was wrong and move to this new strategy. And that sounds pretty straightforward. It's like, look, we made a mistake, did the pivot, no big deal, right? But no. That is months and months of work, of my work, that had to be thrown away. Okay, so I was not the one being like, hey guys, let's pivot. No, I had to be dragged kicking and screaming by my co-founders to the realization this wasn't working, because my thousands of lines of beautiful code all had to be thrown away. And I was kind of depressed. Because here's my line of thought. It was like, well, if all my work turned out to be waste, even though I had done it agile, well-factored, beautiful code. It was all waste. Then why did I even have to be here? Like, couldn't I have been on vacation these 6 months, having a nice trip on a beach somewhere, and my co-founders could have done the work? After all my work got thrown away. Does anyone know where this is headed? Right? Well, no. If we hadn't built this product and we hadn't shipped it, we wouldn't have learned this very important thing about customers, namely they don't want an instant messaging add-on. And that was a really critical insight. So the learning justified the failure. And we all know, those of us who've been managers in big companies, whenever you really screw up and you're scraping the bottom of the barrel of excuses for, to justify you'd always be like, well, at least we learned something, right? Good learning experience. That's like the weakest excuse you have. In general management, you guys should know, if you don't know, if you claim to have learned something, you are about to be fired. Okay? Because that means you either didn't make a very good plan, in which case you should be fired, or worse, you made a good plan and failed to execute it. Double fire that guy, right? So I understand we're always very nervous to admit to having learned, but if you believe what I've been saying, that a startup is an experiment, that we faced extreme uncertainty from the beginning, then learning is our most vital element of progress. But here's the problem. Telling people that you learned something, anyone can tell a good story about learning. That's not very interesting. But going back to InView, saying that we learned something important made me feel better. It's like, well, at least these 6 months of my life were not a complete and total waste. So good for me, right? But then I had this thought, which was like, well, hold on. If my goal these last 6 months was to learn this important thing about customers, why did it take 6 months? I mean, how come the word learning now is only coming up at the end as an excuse? Because think about, what did my co-founders and I spend those 6 months talking about? Do you think the word learning ever came across? No. You guys, what am I talking about? You guys know what we talked about. We talked about what features do we absolutely have to include in the first version, and which ones could we live without? Which bugs do we absolutely have to fix? We can't possibly live with our reputations if we leave that, or we can let that one go, right? Which customers should we listen to, and which ones should we ignore? Who's our target audience that we want to lay focus on? All those debates. Of course, what kind of car we're going to drive when we're very excited. All that stuff, none of it had anything to do with learning. It was all just deciding the right answer to build this product. And yet, customers didn't even find out how bad our design decisions were. Customers didn't experience the bugs that we fixed or didn't fix. None of that mattered at all because we kind of gotten the value proposition fundamentally wrong. So I was like, wait a minute. Why did we have to support like 12 different instant messaging networks in version 1? Would the learning have been the same if we'd supported only 6? Or like only 3? Or only 1? Right? The customers don't want any instant messaging network. That's pretty easy. Okay, the difference in 12 networks and 1 is already an order of magnitude reduction in the amount of code that I personally would have had to write. So that's really upsetting. And I was starting to feel bad, but I didn't feel so bad until I had this thought, which was, wait, hold on. Would the learning have been the same if we had created a single web page, one page, with a screenshot of the product we proposed to build and a giant download button? Would we even have had to create page 2, where we apologize the software is not available yet? Think it through. What did I say before? The customers wouldn't download the software. It literally means they wouldn't click the download button. So it doesn't matter what's on page 2. It could be a 404. No customers would find out. It doesn't matter what's on page 2 or page 10. It doesn't matter what happens in the 12th hour of the user experience or the 25th. Customers aren't getting past step 1. And now I was really upset. I was like, wait, hold on. How is it possible that the company could get the same value out of a one-day crappy web page that some designer could have made versus my 6 months of writing beautiful, well-factored code, if I do say so myself? That doesn't seem right. And I looked at my business card. I had a business card. Everyone has a business card, and it said, Eric Ries, Chief Technology Officer. Okay, it did not say Chief crappy one-page landing page experiment officer. My job was to make technology, and yet my claim is that the value to the company would have been the same if we just created a single web page. And that was really upsetting because, like all of us, I had been trained as a functional specialist, Fred Taylor style, to think that if I did my job well, if I wrote good code, if I made good technology, then the company would make good progress. And that basic intuition is dead wrong. Now, that's the way we measure progress. But that still doesn't answer a difficult question, which is, I'm not the first person to give you guys startup advice, I know. There's a cottage industry of experts who go around telling everybody how to make money and how to be successful as an entrepreneur. And if your experience was anything like mine when I was an entrepreneur, this advice will make you crazy fast. because it's wildly contradictory. So if you have a day of speakers at your typical startup advice session, speaker one will be like, hey everybody, everyone knows that Steve Jobs would never release a product without excellent design. So really make sure you focus on design. And the next speaker will be like, yeah, but also design doesn't matter that much. Because if you look at Craigslist or eBay, it's really important product, even Amazon, their design's terrible. It doesn't seem to, customers don't mind. You're like, got it. Good design and no design. Check. And then you're like, next customer, listen, you don't want to be the next Friendster. Everyone knows the cautionary tale of Friendster. Huge initial success, but the technology doesn't scale. So especially if you're an engineer, you better worry about scalability from day one. And then the next person will be like, and also don't worry too much about scalability, because if you look at the famous, really successful companies like Facebook, it didn't scale at the beginning, and they kind of figured it out as they went along. So you're like, got it, scalability and no scalability, check. And if your experience is anything like mine, after a day of sitting with your co-founder, you turn to your co-founder and be like, okay, I got all this advice, what do you want to do? And the co-founder would be like, make it so. Like, what? Yeah, just implement the advice. I'm like, well, which advice? He's like, all of it. Let's just do it all. Well, it's contradictory. Do you want me to invest in design? Or he's like, well, just the right amount. Just the right amount of scalability. What's the just the right amount? It's incredibly, incredibly frustrating. And of course, all of these stories, they're not scientific. They're just, I did this thing, then I got really rich. And therefore, if you do this thing, you too will get really rich. Okay, that's what startup advice generally looks like. But if you think about the logical fallacies in there, it's like there's so many, it's hard to, I lose track when I try to count them all, right? How do you know that I actually did what I said that I did? How do you know that the success that I had was because of the advice I'm giving you and not in spite of the advice I gave you? How do you know that I actually am really rich? Right? How do you know my company was actually successful? How do you know that what worked in my industry will work in your industry? How do you know that what worked in the past will work? I mean, I could go on and on all day, right? So how do we know? And the answer is we don't. The only real advice I can give you is to learn to think for yourself. And I can offer you a heuristic for evaluating different ideas about what you could do in your company to test for yourself if they will have a positive impact. And it looks like this. This is the build, measure, learn feedback loop, the flux capacitor of Lean Startup. And it's very, very simple. What we do as entrepreneurs is we turn ideas into products. Since we're in software, most of us, we turn ideas into code. Okay? Everything else is a fascinating side effect. Not necessary. All the pizza and the Mountain Dew, it's not necessary. It's just a necessary evil to get the code. But the code is not a mean, doesn't exist for its own benefit. It exists for the benefit of customers. And when customers interact with our products, that necessarily generates data about what happened, which we can choose to measure if we want. And then if we really advance, we can choose to use that data to learn, to influence our next set of ideas, and then do the loop over and over again. So entrepreneurship is a process of continuous innovation running through this simple three-stage build, measure, learn feedback loop. The very simple idea is that the advice that will help you, the processes that will help, the infrastructure and architecture that will help you as an entrepreneur is whatever will accelerate your total time through the loop. So it's not things that help you build faster, measure faster, learn faster, if they come at the expense of the other two. So as an engineer, I used to use this argument all the time to get out of doing work I didn't want to do. Like, oh, you want me to build a data warehouse? You know what? I could do that. But honestly, if we just don't do the data warehouse, then I'll be able to code faster. We'll be able to make more and better features. And so our customers don't care how good our reports are. They only care how good our product is. So how about we don't do the data warehouse? And that argument is so effective. Some of you have used this argument. It's so effective because it's totally true. You can code faster if you don't measure, in the same way that you can drive faster if you just close your eyes and floor the accelerator. That will get the car in motion, and that's the image I want you to have in your mind. That's what most of us are busy doing right now. We are just closing our eyes and hoping for the best instead of testing scientifically if we're on the right track. It's like we're driving a car straight off a cliff, but we're bragging about our excellent gas mileage. Right? It's like that we're very efficiently doing the wrong things. That's what we have to get out of. So this is the framework you can use to test for yourself if an idea actually makes sense. Now, there's a bunch of specific techniques that you can go online and you can read now for weeks on end about all these techniques. None of them is particularly difficult. Probably the most controversial, continuous deployment, which is about putting software into production as fast as it can be written without taking the site down or introducing bugs. That's mildly complicated, but a lot of these things, split testing, net promoter score, minimum viable product, these are very simple concepts. But they all, in my opinion, have the net effect of minimizing total time through the loop. That's why they're powerful. But because most of us are focused on doing our little part, our Taylor-style department most efficiently, we can't quite adopt the mindset that these require. So it's actually the mindset that is difficult to change, not the techniques. And yet, I know that people are going to want to talk about the techniques because, they're the shiny thing that we can all see. And I'm happy to get into the technical nitty-gritty with anybody who wants when we get to the Q&A. But instead of diving into techniques right now, I want to share one last concept from the book, and then we'll break for Q&A. And I know some of you have been like, when is he going to talk about accounting? He promised. I know, accounting, so exciting, right? Who wants to talk? Look, I want to talk about this thing I call innovation accounting, not innovative accounting. That's the thing that gets you thrown in prison. So do please be careful. These remarks are inspired by a diagram I saw in a book called The Toyota Way. If you haven't read this book, it's an amazing book about how Toyota became the world's largest auto manufacturer. And there's this pyramid, and it says, look, most of the time when we talk about Toyota, and in fact this is true for lean startups, we talk about the process stuff, the famous andon cord that you pull to stop the production line, Kanban. When we're talking about lean startup, we talk about split testing, all this process stuff. But we forget that all the process stuff in the world will not be effective unless it is based on a foundation that allows people to invest in that kind of process. And in the case of Toyota, that foundation is their philosophy of long-term thinking. And that really had a big impact on me because I said, okay, if this is the Toyota way, what is the startup way? What should we be thinking about? What are the prerequisite investments we have to make in order to help entrepreneurs actually adopt these processes? And in a fit of inspiration, I drew this very simple diagram. Our foundation is accountability, which gives rise to better process, which then enables us to have a better culture, which allows us to attract and retain the best people. So, most of the startup advice in the world is all about people and culture. It's like, how do we get the right super entrepreneurial people in our company? You can read 100, Hacker News articles about that probably today. How do I find the best co-founder and whatnot? My favorite bit of cultural advice is like, make sure that you have a culture of focus. Focus is very important. It's like, yeah, no kidding. It's like telling an entrepreneur to focus, like telling someone who's overweight that they should lose weight. It's like, yeah, very helpful. Thank you for that advice. But how? What is the mechanism by which we achieve focus? That's what's difficult. Those are the process questions we should be focused on. But all the process questions in the world won't make a difference if we don't have the right accountability paradigm. And right now, most entrepreneurs in the world are held accountable to what I call vanity metrics. People familiar with the concept of vanity metrics? They're the numbers you put in your press release to make your competitors feel bad. So just the biggest number you can, like, okay, we have 100 million messages sent on our platform. Okay, it's one of those great, total registered users. Ever seen a total net registered users graph? It can only go up and to the right by definition. It's an excellent graph to have. Investors love it. Right, these numbers, we put them in our press release because we know they don't give our competitors any insight into our business. Because you have 100 million messages sent, that might mean 100 million people tried your product one time and churned out. Or it might mean that one guy likes your product way too much. Or anything in between. It doesn't tell you anything about what's actually happening. So when we hold people accountable for those vanity metrics, we say, okay, a year from now, entrepreneur, you need to hit this special milestone. Here's what happens. We've all been there in the negotiation between the entrepreneur and the person that holds them accountable. And I've noticed this negotiation, by the way, it's almost word for word identical, whether the person is your spouse, because you're a garage entrepreneur, a VC, because you're a garage entrepreneur, or the CFO of your company, because you're an intrapreneur, okay? It's the same negotiation. It always goes just like this. Honey, spouse, VC, CFO, have I got an idea for you? Okay, I'm going to build this amazing product. And if you just give me 1 year and like $1 million or our whole life savings and this team of 5, I promise you the most amazing results you ever saw. We're going to have millions of customers and billions of dollars of revenue on the cover of magazines, right? You know how this goes, right? We make what we call the plausible promise. The biggest, most ludicrous thing you can get away with promising without sounding like a crazy person. Okay, now here's what happens. VC's like, great, here's your check. Spouse says, yep, take the... But everyone says, okay, well, you said a year from now we have 1 million customers. Guess what? That's your new accountability system. The plausible promise just became the death grip. Right? It's like, okay, well, now we got to have millions of customers 1 year from now. So now let's flash forward a year later. Now, what do we know for sure? Here's what I claim. I predict, guaranteed every time, the money has been spent. Money's all gone. Somehow, right on schedule, the money has been spent. There's no money left. I guarantee you the team of 5 has been very busy. They've been working hard. They didn't get very much sleep. They have achieved many product milestones. If we're being honest with each other, okay, probably there's not so much in the way of revenue or customers, right? So instead of millions of customers, we have, hundreds. And I remember when we were raising money for InView, we raised $8 million from VCs with this amazing hockey stick graph, an actual hockey stick that went up and to the right. We're very excited about it. It went from about like $300 a month, total revenue, from the days when we were like doing the instant messaging add-on to like, I think we were $7,000 or $8,000 a month in revenue when we finally made the pivot. And we'd show it to VCs and they'd be like, wow, this is exciting. We can't wait to invest. What are the units on this graph? Is this in thousands, right? We're like, no, sir. No, sir, it's in ones. Do not try this at home. It got us kicked out of a lot of investors' office. Now, the same thing happens to our mythical entrepreneur. They come back, honey, VC, spouse, CFO. Remember when I said we don't have millions of customers. We have, a couple hundred. But you see where this is headed? We have learned so much. And if you just give me another year and like $5 million and a team of 25, I promise you, it doesn't matter what you promise at that point. We all know, it's funny because we know that entrepreneur or manager is about to get fired and this marriage is in trouble, right? That's how it goes. Because the problem is we've been held accountable to what this fundamentally vanity metric of like gross revenue, which actually has no predictive power whatsoever. And if you look at the annals of like the biggest investing blunders of all time, they all have this problem, right? Like think about when the founders of Twitter went to their investors when they had only like 300 hyper-addicted customers. And they said, we're so embarrassed about the vanity metrics, would you like your money back? And several of Silicon Valley's best investors said, yeah, thank you, I'll take my money back. That's $1 billion mistake. Okay, very expensive mistake, all caused by vanity metrics. But we need some system of accountability. Like it's not adequate to say, well, let's just let entrepreneurs do whatever they want and hope for the best. That's the dot-com bubble all over again. What we need is an alternate system of accountability, which means an alternate system of accounting for progress. And so here's the very brief seed of the idea of innovation accounting. Of course, you can read a lot more about it if you want all the detail. There's a lot of math involved, so it's kind of hard for one of these talks. I know. People love the parts of Lean Startup, by the way, that fit on a bumper sticker. That gets people really excited, pivots, MVP, all that stuff. This stuff has been much harder to get people to pay attention to because it involves math. And the bumper sticker would be like the size of your car. But sorry, it's actually important. So I'm going to tell you about it anyway. I want to get us focused, instead of on product and business milestones, towards what I call learning milestones. And the first of them is the milestone of achieving a minimum viable product. But the celebration of minimum viable product is not that we built a product. Who cares? The reason minimum viable product is so powerful is it allows us to establish the baseline for how customers actually behave on one or more of our key metrics. So let's just do a quick exercise. Who's ever written a business plan? Keep your hands up, if the business plan had a spreadsheet in the back. Keep your hand up if the spreadsheet in the back made predictions for revenue in year 5. Keep your hand up if the revenue in year 5 was at least $100 million. Oh, this is a real difference from Silicon Valley. Wait, hold on. Do we have any? Oh, we got a few hands up. All right, keep your hand up if you actually built a company that achieved $100 million in revenue from that business. All the hands go down, just like in Silicon Valley. Look at that. Okay, now there's nothing wrong with the spreadsheet in the back. Okay, we all have to build the spreadsheet. It's a required exercise. The problem is that we focus our energy on the outputs of the spreadsheet instead of the inputs. So let me make another prediction about your business plan. I predict that if I had your plan with me right now from Appendix B of your business plan, and I had a magnifying glass, obviously, because it's in 2-point font, I sit there and try to read what is this damn thing, and I'd find a box, and the box would say 10%. If I trace my finger to the left with my magnifying glass, 10%, I would say, what is this 10%? It would say, percentage of customers who signed up for the free trial. Now, here's my claim. That is not the kind of assumption that should be listed in 2-point font in Appendix B. That is actually a leap of faith assumption upon which our entire business depends. How do I know? Because what happens if I change that 10 to a 0? Think about every other cell in the spreadsheet. They all magically go to 0. That's what we learned the hard way at InView. If no one will even try the free trial, it really doesn't matter what the lifetime value of a customer would have been or how many hits you get from the press, or nothing else matters. This is a giant 0 that gets multiplied through your whole plan. Okay, so that should be on 10-point, on 100-point font in red letters on your wall. If we don't get 10% of customers to sign up, we are doomed. Now here's establish the baseline. Establish the baseline says, now that we know that's a leap of faith assumption, let's just go find out how many people want to sign up for the free trial right now. Let's just get the real number. Even if the number is 0, that's actually good news. Now, most entrepreneurs think I'm crazy at this point. They're like, well, I don't want to find out that it's zero because that's going to mean, people will be depressed and that's going to cause morale problems. I don't want to tell my investors. But guess what? It's better to have bad news that's true rather than good news that we made up, right? We have real knowledge about where we actually are. And look, what I want us to do when we're working with entrepreneurs, for the investors in the room, is when they find out that this is 0%, we should celebrate that now we know what the hell's going on. And now we can work on the second learning milestone to tune the engine to try to make those baseline numbers look more like the business plan. And then if we are successful at that, or if we're unsuccessful, either way, we can move to the third learning milestone, which is to decide whether to pivot or persevere. We should celebrate being at a point where we can determine if it's time to pivot or not. And I'll leave you with one last bit of practical advice. If we know for sure that we're going to have to pivot to be successful, why do we always have the pivot meeting at the last minute? Something I don't understand. I used to do this all the time. It's crazy, right? So think about the money's about to run out. You're down to your last dollar. If you think about, I'm going to go to Ghostbusters for a second. You remember the scene in Ghostbusters when that first customer finally arrives? Right? They're sitting there having the Chinese food at the table. This is the last of the petty cash. They're literally out of money. There's no more money left. They're about to go out of business. And luckily for them, their first customer comes in that very day. And if you think about why did the customer choose that day to come in, did anyone remember why? It's because Zool has invaded Manhattan that day. Think about it, Zool had incredible timing. Right? Think about it. If Zool invades Manhattan a year earlier or a year later, there's no Ghostbusters. Right? It would have been fine. So most entrepreneurs I know are currently right now busy waiting for Zool. They're just like, well, eventually the customer would just walk in. And so what happens is when you get down to the last dollar and Zool doesn't appear, you're like, crap, now what? So now you have the worst meeting ever, okay? The roof is on fire, the walls are caving in, and it's like, now should we decide to pivot or not, okay? Have you ever been in one of those meetings? It's not exactly like a forum for great rational conversation. So here's my claim. If we know for sure that we're going to have to pivot, let's just schedule the meeting in advance. Just put it on the calendar. Let's just say every 8 weeks or 6 weeks, pick your frequency, we're going to have a meeting, the pivot or persevere meeting, in which we will evaluate if our current strategy is working or whether we should pivot. And just by making that one simple change, we dramatically change the tenor of the meeting. Because now it's not like something we have to keep secret from the employees, like, we're going to ruin morale. It's like, nope, it's a routine thing that we do. It's no big deal. Even better, we can now start to work backwards to say, well, if 6 weeks from today, I'm going to have to evaluate if my current strategy is working, what information would I want to have in the room at the time that would tell me if our current strategy is working? And is the current work I'm doing today actually going to help me get that information 6 weeks from now? Is this press release I'm busy writing to send out to TechCrunch or whoever, is that actually going to help me figure out if we're on track? What is the learning value of the 10,000th person from TechCrunch who doesn't like my product? Right? Wasn't the learning value of 9,999 the same? Wouldn't 500 people not like my product? Would 100 people not like my product? Wouldn't that have been sufficient? So why am I writing a press release for? Why am I building these features that won't ship for 12 weeks? Why am I working on this thing that only makes sense, 3 iterations from now? It can keep us focused on what do we actually have to learn right now in order to figure out if we're on track or not. So schedule the meeting in advance. You will have a much more pleasant strategic conversation. All of this is in the service, as I said before, of ending the epidemic of the waste of people's time that our industry is so good at. And what I want you to do before we move to questions is just take a minute and think about, is there something that I've said or something that's occurred to you in the last, I don't know how long, it's been like an hour we've been chatting together. If you have even one idea of something you could implement in your company tomorrow, not a year from now, not in your next company, but what could you do tomorrow that would get you kind of moving in this direction? Could you just think about something that you could accomplish in 24 hours, just for a minute? I'll just be quiet for a second. All of us as entrepreneurs have to get good at thinking big but starting small. That's true with process transformation as it is with our products. So I left a bunch of questions unanswered. I'm hoping we'll get to some of these in the Q&A if we have a few minutes, like how do we know specifically when to pivot? What is the relationship between vision, strategy, and product? Specifically, what do you measure? How do you get your product to grow faster if you want? This last question is the one that is very much on my mind these days, which is it possible that we could actually build an organization that goes faster as it grows, or is bureaucracy our inevitable destination? I have to admit, I left these questions intentionally unanswered because I heard there's this amazing book that just came out. You should all read it. And I thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Do we have time for some questions? A few minutes? Is there possibly get some water? Anyone can help me with that? Thank you. So I have the spotlight on, so this is going to be kind of a challenge. I will do my best. I think we have a question there. Just shout it out. Thank you. I heard it's the 4th largest in North America. Is that true? Wow. Well, naturally, I assume that goes without saying. I know. I see it. We're on the same page. How's your friend doing? Handsome man, is he? Yeah. I'm going to answer in an indirect way, but I hope it will make sense. Because when we first started talking to customers at InView, we had this, I was the guy making the sample size argument all the time. Because here's how it would go. We bring one customer into our office, okay? We would sit them down in front of our product, and we'd say, okay, please download this instant messaging add-on, and they would be like, no. They're like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. They're like, what is this? This is weird, I don't want to do it. No, thank you. We're like, look, dude, we're paying you to be here, so do it. And they're like, okay, fine. And they would like download it, and they kind of try it a little bit, and then we get to this moment, and I talk about this in the book. I won't be too redundant, but basically like, look, now it's time to invite one of your friends, and they'd be like, not going to do it. We'd be like, we already went through this. We're paying you to be here, and they're like, too bad. Okay, like I would because they're like, look, this is teenagers. You got to think about it. And they're like, I don't know if this thing is cool yet, and if it's lame, and I invite one of my friends, then that'll make me look lame. And on the commandments of mission critical software written somewhere, it's like never make a teenager look lame in front of their friends, right? Very important. Thank you very much. Very important thing. So we couldn't pay that customer to use our software. Okay, I want you to really think about that. And you know exactly what I said. I was in the room. I was like, look to my co-founder who found this, like, fire that customer. You idiot. How did you find the one person who Give me another one. Okay, second customer comes in. I swear to God, same thing happens. Now I'm like, you are a terrible focus group finder. What are you, 2 customers in a row? Okay, third customer in a row comes in and we can't pay them to use our software. Now, I'll tell you exactly what I said then. I said, this is not a statistically significant sample. So how many customers in a row have to hate your product before it's statistically significant? Well, guess what? I don't think it's very many. And the reason I use this indirect way of answering your question is that anyone who's taken a statistics class will know that the formula for sample size is a function of 2 things. One, it's what's your confidence interval, but also what is the signal-to-noise ratio of the underlying thing you want to measure. We're used to using statistics for things like presidential polls, or I don't know what the Canadian equivalent is because I'm an American totally ignorant about global geopolitics. I apologize. In America, we have presidential polls that are focused on the very fine-grained, 0.1% difference between this candidate and that candidate. If we're testing for that kind of stuff in a startup, we do need large samples, but we're also doomed because now we're trying to optimize the tiny stuff when it's the big questions that should be occupying our attention. So the good news is that for big questions, we don't need a very large sample. So I was actually just working with a team that did a bunch of split tests, and they came back and they said, we can't figure out how to interpret the split test. I said, what do you mean? They're like, well, one day, each day we run the test. One day, the old thing is ahead. Excuse me. Sometimes the new thing is ahead. We can't tell if the new thing is better than the old thing. I was like, sure you can. You just don't want to admit it. If it has no difference, if it's pretty much random which one, then it had no effect. That's a failure. Move on. So it's okay to just, if it's not obvious that something's better than the other thing, like it's a failure, move on. And the great thing about entrepreneurship is because it's a constant iteration, making a mistake is not that big a deal because we're going to run the next test and the next test and the next test. Each test builds on the previous test. And so if we made an error, the next test will turn it up and we'll get a chance to kind of go back and do it over. So yeah, don't worry about sample size. Just just do the test. Does that actually answer your question? Okay, thank you. Good. Question on this side, yeah.
Hi. My question is, if you're running or starting a consulting company,
If your friend is, I understand. Yeah.
what factors do you want to take into consideration in terms of financing or strapping way, or whether you choose
Yeah. Well, good luck getting VCs to fund a consulting company or to your friend. I mean, so the first question for fundraising is always, do you have the option to raise money or not? A lot of people don't understand that there's all these, you can read 100 blogs about how to raise money and how to make a good pitch and this and that. And what people forget is that those pitches are very context sensitive. So if you think about, those famous stories about how Mark Zuckerberg was the worst pitcher ever and could showing up in his pajamas and barely could put two sentences together, really was a bad fundraiser. Still raised money on the best terms imaginable because he had the traction in the business to show it made the other stuff really not matter. So, and also, let's be honest, he looked the part of the kind of thing that Silicon Valley investors like to fund. And we're a pattern recognition business, and pattern recognition is just a fancy word for bias. So if you look the part, if you have the right background, if you have the traction, you can raise money for anything. But for the rest of us, that's not necessarily true. So the first thing to understand about whether to raise money or not is just to understand if you even have the option or not. Do you have access to the kind of funders who would want to fund the kind of business you're in? If the answer is yes, then we can get into the advanced stuff. And in the book, I talk about a concept called engines of growth. And it's one of these things that just cannot get it on a bumper sticker, so nobody cares. But I don't know. I think it's really important. And it's about how products actually grow. And it's based on what I call the law of sustainable growth, where each new customer comes from the actions of past customers. So in the case of a consulting business, let's say that you make $100,000 per client. But you have to pay a sales staff to go find you new clients, and on average it costs you $90,000 to acquire a new client. So you have a 10% marginal profit per customer. Everyone following the math so far? See why this doesn't fit on a bumper sticker? I'm sorry. Your business will actually, in that case, would grow at the exact same rate as a business like InView, mine, where we would acquire customers for $1. Sorry, we would make $1 per customer, and it would cost us 90 cents. Again, 10% marginal profit. So it's a feedback loop, an engine that turns. And paid engine is one of the three. There's also sticky and viral, and we can talk more about it if people want. But in that situation, what happens is, in a real business, the 10% margin that you make per customer gets consumed by your fixed costs. You have a certain amount of fixed costs that mean that you're actually starving your business of the opportunity for growth that would actually be organic growth if you didn't have fixed costs. That's the situation to raise money. You should raise money to offset the fixed costs so that your engine of growth can turn at the optimum rate. If you don't have an engine of growth, then it's not a good idea to raise money, and you only do it if you have to because you have no other alternative. But that's the very short answer. I hope that's helpful. Let's go over here. That's you, yeah. I love the math questions. So, do people understand the concept of viral coefficient? Is that new to people? Okay. Seems like quite a few people don't know what I'm talking about. So, viral coefficient is a mathematical equation. It comes from epidemiology, where if someone God forbid were to unleash a new virus in a city, even if it's the best city in the world, the math will determine if we live or die. Okay. So it's people confuse viral growth with word of mouth, and that's really a mistake because word of mouth is optional. Okay. When I first bought a TiVo, everyone remember TiVo when it was so cool? I would not shut up about the damn TiVo. I told all my friends, family, shut up about it. I was you have to get one, okay? But fundamentally, they could opt out if they wanted to, okay? But if someone drops Ebola in my city, it's not optional. I can't be I'm opting out. It's an epidemic. It's involuntary. It's too bad for you. Facebook, PayPal, these products are epidemics. You can be I don't want to be on Facebook, but it's extremely difficult to, you guys know, it's extremely difficult to resist. You get that email that's someone has tagged you in a photo, okay? But we don't tell you, conveniently left out which friend and what photo. You're I better click that thing. That is an email that every human being clicks on. It just has one of the highest click-through rates of any email in the history of emails. That's how it is. So the viral coefficient is a mathematical expression that says for each person that gets infected, how many other people get infected as a necessary side effect. And if that number mathematically is 1.0 or greater, you have an epidemic on your hands because each person shows up even if they die or churn out of your product immediately, they've brought more than one other person with them. And so if you get one, if one gets you 2 and 2 get you 4, you see how it grows really quickly. So you get exponential growth if the viral coefficient is greater than 1.0. And incidentally, you get exponential shrinkage if the number is less than 1.0. So it's like you're in a viral business. You live or die by this one number. Now, to calculate it, it's very simple, actually. You think about what are the steps necessary to do the conversion. So think about a product like Facebook. When you sign up, first thing they ask you to do is tell everyone in your address book that you're now on Facebook and they should join too. So the math is what is the conversion rate of an individual person signing up times how many invitations do they send on average times what is the conversion rate of each invitation. You multiply those 3 numbers together, it gives you a number. If that adds up to, if it multiplies to a number greater than 1.0, you're in good shape. If less than, you're doomed. And since I know I have some confused looks, it's either because I just did the math wrong, which is actually, this is really hard to do live. So if I got it wrong, someone please correct me. But more likely, it's just hard to follow what I'm saying because we don't have a whiteboard and this isn't a math seminar. So you should look it up online if you're actually doing this in your business. But it's important to understand the concept of viral growth because it is one of the 3 fundamental engines of growth, right? In viral growth, each new customer comes from the actions of a past customer because they're doing this involuntary referral. So is that helpful? Awesome.